Tonight, like I said, I'm going to share with you my experience of a very unique time in my life and in my ministry where I was called into a situation and an opportunity that I, in no way, shape, or form, ever thought I would have been called into or anything that I would have to confront and to be a part of in my life and in my ministry. But whenever you accept a call into a church, you really never know what the ministry is going to be like. I did not know that for the first 20 months that I was here at Park Church that I would have such a profound and deeply impactful ministry of memorial services and funerals and celebrating people's lives. Honestly, I didn't know that was going to happen. I'm looking at Doris. Like we've partnered for 25 memorial services in the 20 months that I've been here at Park Church, and I had no idea that was going to be part of my ministry. You receive a call, and you feel that God is calling you to a place, and you go, okay, I'll go, but you really don't know what is going to happen. And so I very much have taken to this quote from the book of Esther. If you are familiar with the book of Esther, then you know. If not, let me just tell you that Queen Esther was in no way, shape, or form thinking that she would be in a position where she could save the lives of her people. And yet, there she was. She was given this opportunity. She was given this power. She was called for a time such as this to use her ministry, her gifts, her graces, her skills to protect those who she loved and those who were part of her community. And when I was in Northwest Montana in the early 2010, 2011, 2012, I was called for a ministry that was incredibly unique that, like I said, has shaped me and really empowered me and impacted me in such deep ways. I was sharing a very brief part of this story with my colleague Allison McCulley over at Together West Michigan today. And after I'd kind of shared a little bit, a 5-minute version of what you're going to hear in 40 minutes, she said, I had no idea about this. And I said, well, I don't really lead with this. And I was joking with someone earlier. I said, well, I don't lead with the drugs that I did in college. Right? I don't think people really want to know what I did in college. As Chef once said on South Park, there's a time in your life for everything, and that time is college. But this was well after college. In fact, I was called to Flathead Valley United Church of Christ, which then transitioned to Community Congregational United Church of Christ in Kalispell, Montana, in the spring of 2007. And this was my backyard from 2007 to 2012 when I took a call at Kensington Community Church in San Diego, California, where I served for 10 years prior to receiving the call here at Park Church. This is a picture of Crater Lake up in Glacier National Park. Kalispell, Montana is the gateway community to Glacier National Park. If you go visit Glacier National Park, which you should before the glaciers all melt, and that's not a joke, they will be gone probably in the next 15 to 20 years at the most. And if you look at pictures of Glacier National Park from the year 1924 versus 2024, you can definitely see how the glaciers have receded. But this is Glacier Lake during the summertime. There's not much snow there at all, though you can still see a couple of pockets. And you can see where Kalispell is. It is in Northwest Montana. And when people think of Northwest Montana, this is mostly what they think of. They think of the Rocky Mountains, and they think of the beautiful forests, and they think Montana has this wonderful double entendre of a state motto, kind of like it's their version of pure Michigan. It's get lost, which both speaks to them wanting to get outside to get lost in the mountains and the woods, but also come and visit, but please don't stay. Because in the 2020 census, Montana is over 1 million residents for its very first time in the 2020 census. Let that Let that sink in for a moment. Grand Rapids would be easily the largest city in Montana by 3 times. The largest city in Montana is Billings at just over 120,000 people. So you go to Montana to get away from people, which is one reason why I loved it. No. So I've actually often said that Montana is a state of libertarians. There are progressive libertarians and there are conservative libertarians, but everyone is a libertarian. Most everyone just wants to be left alone, which is fantastic if everyone is getting along. But that kind of lack of civic understanding and community engagement is what allows for Montana to be a breeding ground for hate groups in the United States. This is the other thing that many people often know happens in Montana. There's the Rocky Mountains and the wonderful forests, but there are also a great deal of hate groups that migrate to northwest Montana and Idaho. The reason being is because one of the inherent intrinsic values in Montana is individual property rights. The pendulum has swung so far over to the side of individual property rights versus the other side of the pendulum being civic responsibility and community planning and community building, that the neo-Nazi living down the street, well, that's fine, because we're all libertarians. So they buy their house, they have their property, they have their ranch, and as long as they do not, as long as it doesn't explode into extremism and violence, there is this live and let live ethic that just permeates through the state of Montana and Idaho. So this is a heat map of hate groups that has been published by the Southern Poverty Law Center.
Wow.
First, I'd like you to notice that the largest concentration of hate groups is in the old Confederacy. But the brighter red the state, the more intense the hate groups are active in that community. So even though there are more concentration of hate groups in the old Confederacy, in the old American Southeast, notice that Montana and Idaho are the brightest states. The deepest crimson of hate group and hate activity is happening in northwest Montana and Idaho. Now there's a reason why, again, there's so few people that live there, and not even to this day in 2024, there's 97% of the population of Montana is white. So if you are a white separatist or a white supremacist, and you do not want to live around people of color, then Montana and Idaho is a wonderful place for you to move to in their idea. The largest non-white population in Montana is, of course, the American Indian or Native American communities, but they mostly stay on the reservation. And there's a lot of reasons why we can talk about that. That's not for tonight. But there is a very strong ethic in the American Indian communities to not leave the reservation. And so even though 2% of the population is Native American and American Indian, a lot of white folks never even encounter an American Indian or Native American unless they themselves go onto the reservation, because that population is not coming off of the reservation into the major cities. So there are a lot of different groups that have found themselves in Montana and in Idaho. These are some of the more prominent ones. And they don't always all get along. Some are atheist groups, others are religious groups, some are heavy gun owning groups, others are anti-gun. Some want to use government, they want to infiltrate government groups and government systems. Others want to be separationists and isolationists and stay out of government altogether. That's actually in our favor for those of us who are wondering how you might confront a hate group and hate activity in your community. One thing going for you is they don't get along with one another a lot of times. And so there's a lot of infighting, which allows you a lot of inroads to be able to build community with them and to stage sort of a resistance movement, if you will. The ones that you're going to hear about more tonight than anyone is you're going to hear more about Pioneer Little Europe, which was incredibly active in Northwest Montana while I was there. But some of these other names might be familiar to you, like Oath Keepers or Proud Boys. These are names that you might have recognized before. These are identified by the Southern Poverty Law Center as white separatist, white supremacist, neo-Nazi organizations operating inside the borders of the United States. The very last one, the Christian identity cult, is the one that has the strongest faith-based or religious ideology. And its ideology is that all non-Christians were created by God prior to Adam and Eve. And only the descendants of Adam and Eve are white Caucasian Europeans. All other nationalities and races were created prior to Adam and Eve, and therefore are called, quote unquote, mud people. And so the mud people are non-whites, and the descendants of Adam and Eve are white, and therefore white people have the blessing of God and God's mandate to populate the world and control the world and rule over the world in the name of God. They're also not a they also have a very strong relationship with 17th and 18th century anthropology and sociology, which has often been called the science of racism. And that was a lot of the science that was being propagated to say why African Americans were and black folk were not as smart, not as moral, not as ethical, and therefore giving rationalization for why certain laws like Jim Crow laws were allowable in our country. And so they haven't kept up with the science, the Christian identity cult, and they still have, they've still held on to what's called the science of racism. And so those two things, this very warped version of Christianity and this very warped sense of science has given breed to the Christian identity cult. And we have, and unfortunately I was able to interact with many of them for a long time there in Montana. And for the most part, even like I said, I moved there in 2007, and there was a lot of dormant activity that was going on in Montana. But there was one thing in particular that happened in our nation that really got them scared and got them motivated to do something about it. And that was in 2008 when our country elected the first non-white president in the history of our country. And this was a seminal moment for the white supremacist neo-Nazi organizations in Northwest Montana. This literally scared the bejesus out of them. And they activated immediately. And we saw so much more activity and recruitment begin in Northwest Montana after the election of President Barack Obama. Now, it took about a year and a half for them to get organized and to get their ducks in a row and to really get up to speed on what they wanted to do, because they were not prepared for this event. The idea that a non-white person could win the presidency never occurred to them. So they were not activated and organized in a way to respond to this. So it did take them a year and a half to 2 years to get organized and to get activated, but once they did, then we really saw the activity begin. And for me, and how I entered the story, is on April 6, 2010, the first night of Passover. I was sitting in my home there in Kalispell when I received a call on my landline. Remember those? And I saw the caller ID that Rabbi Alan Sesher was calling me. And Rabbi and I had built up a relationship over the first 2 years that I had been there in Montana, in northwest Montana in Kalispell. And so when I saw Alan's name pop up on the caller ID, I immediately picked it up because I loved talking with Alan. He's one of my favorite people on this planet. And Alan, I don't even get a chance to say, hey, what's going on? I said, hello, and before I can say anything else, he says, have you seen the paper today? And I said, no, I haven't looked at the paper today. He said, grab your paper. And I was like, you think I own a paper? So he's like, never mind, I'll read it to you. So he said, in the classified section of the Daily Interlake paper there in Kalispell, there was an advertisement for a film that was going to be shown at the Kalispell Library on the night of April 6, 2010, on the first night of Passover, which was a Holocaust denial film. And it was inviting anyone in the community who would like to watch the film and to discuss the film to please come to this room at the Kalispell Library, and they would be welcome to watch the film and to talk about it. And Alan reads me the advertisement and he says, what are you going to do about this? I said, what do you want me to do about this? He said, this can't stand. And I tried to talk him off the ledge a little bit. Hey man, this is like, I'm a libertarian at this point. Hey man, they're not doing anything. It's not that big of a deal. He's like, no, you don't understand. It won't stop here. This is just the beginning. So I want to ask you again, what are you going to do about it? And I said, well, aren't you going to be there? And he said, no, it's the first night of Passover. I'm going to be busy. So again, I'm going to ask you, what are you going to do about this? So luckily, I had built already some wonderful relationships with other clergy members in the greater Kalispell area. So I called the minister over at the Presbyterian Church, and I called the minister over at the Unitarian Universalist Church, and I called the minister over at First United Methodist, and I called the minister over at First Christian Disciples of Christ, and a number of other churches, and some said, oh, don't worry about it, but others were like, no, this is serious. I'll send out an email to my group, and we'll see what happens. I also got in touch with my friend Will Randall, who was a private investigator, and I asked Will, I said, do you know anything about what's going on? And he said, yeah, let me tell you about Carl Garst. Carl has moved to northwest Montana about a year ago, and he has created this little group called Pioneer Little Europe. And it is actively recruiting white supremacist neo-Nazis to move to Montana, to buy up properties, and to create an enclave or a community that they could have of their own. And they have been recruiting on this website called Stormfront. And he said, I would encourage you to create a username and password, and for you to start monitoring what is going on Stormfront. Has anyone ever heard of Stormfront before? So a couple of you have. I'm guessing most of you, those of you who know what it is, it's because someone in your life, like a Will Randall, told you that you should be aware of what's going on. The rest of you are just good people and have good values, and you would never think about joining a website like Stormfront. Stormfront is, to this day, still one of the most trafficked websites and message boards for neo-Nazis, white supremacists in our country. And so I created, and I'm not on it anymore, so I'm happy to say now what my username or what my handle was on there. So I created a username and a handle called White Rabbit 1975. Because I kind of felt I was going down the rabbit hole. I felt white would be a better word than any other. And then my birth year is 1975. And there were other white rabbits already, so I couldn't just be white rabbit. I had to add some numbers to it. So I put my birth year on there as well. And so I started watching the rhetoric that was going on, and it is vile. It is absolutely vile. This website, though, and my usage of it has come in incredibly handy during my 3 years of doing this in Northwest Montana, because I popped up a lot. And I was able to stay one step ahead of many of the opportunities and the attempts at doing me physical harm. Because, you know, they're not the brightest bulbs, all of them, on the Stormfront. It's truly, there's a lot of lack of education, definitely a lack of emotional intelligence, as well as a lack of actual kind of book smart intelligence. And so they often will be very proud of the fact that they are going to do bodily harm to someone, or at least threaten them and try to intimidate them. So Will and I started monitoring this on a regular basis. And Rabbi was right. It was their intent that first Holocaust denial film was not going to be a one-off event. So that evening, on a very cold and rainy first night of Passover, when it was about 40 degrees outside and thunderstorming, about 70 kind-hearted Kalispell citizens joined me on the other side of the library entrance to take note of who was going into the library and to perform a counter-demonstration that we believe that the values of our community were love and inclusion and diversity and acceptance. That was all we did. The Daily Interlake, the newspaper, thought it was kind of fascinating that 70 people would stand out in the rain to do this, and so they took a picture of us and interviewed us for that event, and we felt pretty good about ourselves. And only about a dozen people went down to the basement of the library to watch the film. And so we're like, oh, we outnumbered them 70 to 12. Like, this can't get worse. Rabbi he's off his rocker. He doesn't know what he's talking about. When Memorial Day 2010 came up, and again there was an advertisement in the Daily Interlake and on Stormfront, and they were going to hold another event at the Kalispell Library, this time on the Saturday of Memorial Day weekend, and they were going to show a history film lauding the military exploits and genius of the Nazi army, and particularly the SS. And this was a huge mistake on their part, because when they were just targeting, the very small Jewish community in Kalispell, most of the citizens weren't really motivated to get involved. But by doing something on Memorial Day, when we honor those who have served our country and have lost their lives, and then they were going to show a film that, in lauding and celebrating the exploits of the SS and the Nazi army, also meant de facto that they were diminishing the valor and the bravery and the accomplishments of the U.S. military. It meant that now I not only could I call the other churches in town, but I could go to the VFW, and I could go to the American Legion, and I could put out a plea for anyone who's had a veteran in their life, or anyone who knows anyone who served in World War II. And that little counter-demonstration of 70 on the first night of Passover turned into over 500 on the Saturday of Memorial Day. And this is a picture that was taken for the Daily Interlake, as I was trying to organize a crowd. I had no community organization or community organizing experience. I've never been the face and the leader of a civic movement. I have no idea how to control a crowd, particularly a crowd of 500. I mean, when y'all come into church, you'll sit in pews, you're dressed well. You understand the ins and outs of church service. If I say, let us all please stand and rise at this time, you do so. You follow directions. When you have a mob of 500 just on the street, many of them very angry and very upset about what is happening in their public library, it's very hard to control the crowd. And I learned that the hard way, because it was on May 24th, 2010, that I became aware of a group called Antifa. Antifa stands for Anti-Fascist Action. They are an anti-fascist organization. But they are not peaceful. Their ethic is to use violence and to intimidate Nazis the way that Nazis often use violence to intimidate black people and queer people and Jewish people and Muslim people and immigrants and such. And we had a group of 12 Antifa people come up from Bozeman, Montana, and they stayed in the back of the line, and unfortunately they assaulted one of the people who was going into the library to watch the film. And what happened when they did this is it completely undid our moral authority. We no longer had the moral high ground, and we were seen as just another, activist group that couldn't be controlled, that as much as we were at the front of the line, we were talking about inclusion and diversity and understanding and everything. At the back of the line, we were preaching violence and beatings and all of those type of things. And so I learned very quickly that you need to get some training to be able to lead such a group. Dr. King, before he put anyone out into the community to work in the civil rights movement, he did a lot of training before he was ever allowed anyone to take a leadership role out into the community, and he even did a really great job of training people who were going to be part of the civil rights movement, who were just rank and file folks who were there to protest and to fight for equal rights in our country. So I accepted some help from the Southern Poverty Law Center in Georgia. Does everyone know the Southern Poverty Law Center? Southern Poverty Law Center does amazing work in our country to track and to fight against and work against the groups that are hate groups in our country. And so they flew up to Montana and they provided us with some training, which I am so thankful for. And one of the things that they taught us, I was joking over here, one of the things that they taught us was, if you're going to get hit in the face, it's better to go with the punch. It hurts a lot less if you go with the punch when they're about to hit you. Because you want to stay nonviolent. And so that's why when you see a lot of nonviolent protests, people go limp and such, is because honestly it hurts less than when someone is striking you. I never thought it was that pragmatic, but that was the case. But they also gave me a lot of community organizing skills. I'm so thankful for the Southern Poverty Law Center. But there was a quid pro quo. Let me get some water here. Because the Southern Poverty Law Center wanted to recruit me to start recording and taking and tracking some of the work that was being done in Northwest Montana. And they asked me if I would attend a meeting at the largest auditorium in Kalispell, at the county building, on January 17th, 2011. It was there that I came to know the name Chuck Baldwin. Chuck Baldwin did a rally at the county building there. Chuck had come up from Tampa, Florida, where he had been the Constitutional Party candidate for governor of Florida. And Chuck was an ordained reverend in the sense that he got online and got an ordination. And he became the chaplain for the Patriot movement. And that's his slogan, that America will be saved by God and with guns. He's a very violent man. And he moved up to Northwest Montana to Kalispell to run for mayor. And he really mobilized and crystallized the group and really gave it some real movement and really provided some leadership that it was lacking. And so I'm there. I want to show you the picture again. See the gentleman with the fedora who's wearing the same kind of burnt orange sweatshirt there in the front? That guy's name is Bruce Guthrie. He was a high school history teacher and a good friend of mine. And when the Southern Poverty Law Center asked me to attend this rally at the county building that Chuck Baldwin was doing, I did not want to go by myself. And so I asked Bruce to go with me. And it was while I was at that rally that for the very first time I heard the phrase Christian nationalism. I'd never heard it before 2011. And it was being propagated by one of the most vile white supremacist neo-Nazis that I've ever seen and ever been in the presence of. These are the tenets of Christian nationalism. You can read them for yourself. And unfortunately, it's kind of caught on in our country. The Public Religion Institute, Public Survey of Religious Institutes just released a latest poll, and 3 out of 10 Americans identify as Christian nationalists. Now that might scare you, but think about what that means on the flip side. That 7 out of 10 do not. So we are still in the vast majority of people who find Christian nationalism to be abhorrent, but since 2011 to 2024, it has found some roots, and it's something that we need to be aware of. And one of the best ways that I can think of Christian nationalism, and it just really crystallizes why it's such a horrible ideology to adhere to, is that it really is just white supremacy and biblical drag. Christian nationalism is white supremacy. It is a theological justification for neo-Nazism. Now, I can be told that it's not, and people will do a really great job of arguing that, and there are a lot of smart people who can twist it to look like something else. But at its core, Christian nationalism is white supremacy. And when you hear Christian nationalism, that's what I want you to think of. Because I don't think anyone here would ever say that we want a white supremacist country. But Christian nationalism is infiltrating our evangelical churches, particularly our more fundamentalist and Pentecostal churches. And it's taken a root, and I'm not throwing any shade on any political party, but we all know that it has a more root in the Republican Party than it does in the Democratic Party. But there is a Christian nationalism part of the Democratic Party as well, but not this kind of Christian nationalism, so I'm not going to go into that too much. But luckily, it still is the vast minority of most registered Republicans. Most registered Republicans denounce Christian nationalism as well. And so there's lots of hope for our country, but we always have to remain vigilant. It was while I was at that Chuck Baldwin rally at the county building in Kalispell that Chuck Baldwin made a not-so-veiled threat at me. At this point, I've been in the newspaper plenty of times. I've been all up and down the stormfront. My name was out there in the neo-Nazi community as someone that they should be paying attention to. And Chuck Baldwin at that meeting talked about God and guns, asked how many people were carrying a firearm with them that evening. 90% of the people just reached into their jacket and was like, here we go! I mean, it was like an NRA convention. And then later on in his speech, he looked right at me and said, we need to get the Christian ministers under control. Because they are one of the biggest enemies to America. And I don't think any of us would be sad if something happened to them. And I turned to my friend Bruce Guthrie and I said, buddy, it's time to go. And we walked out back to back. He got on my other side so that he could see what was going on behind us. And I looked this way, he looked this way, and we walked out like this. It was 3 weeks later that someone broke into my home that I was living in Kalispell. I shouldn't say broke into, the front door was open. Y'all learned that on Sunday, that I have a penchant for not locking the front door. The front door was open. My ex-wife and I at the time, well, my wife at the time, my ex-wife now, we came home from running some errands. And when we had come home, our dogs were running around the house, and you should know that we crated our dogs whenever we left the home. And they were out, and we were like, oh, that's very strange. We also came in, and all of the cabinet doors had been opened. All the drawers had been opened in the kitchen. All the water faucets in the kitchen and in the bathrooms had been turned on. The blinds that were down when we left had been put up. It was a not-so-veiled threat that they could get to us anytime. And I did not take that lightly, and we started locking the front door. But then they started to target my church. And on Easter morning, April 24th, 2011, I drove up to the church, and we had a little front lawn, and there were little plastic Easter eggs. And I thought to myself, oh, one of the parents did a little ad hoc, just a little random Easter egg hunt. That wasn't a hunt at all because they were just all scattered on the front lawn. And I was like, oh, that was sweet. And I did not pick one up. But when the children and the family started to come to church on Easter morning, all of a sudden one of the parents comes up to me and says, have you seen what's in these eggs? I was like, no. And so she took me to my office, and she got on my computer, and she opened up the egg, and there was a website on the egg. And it was, remember Napster? That illegally downloadable, you could download music illegally. There was a website, a link to a Napster site, where you could download the newest album to Prussian Blue. Who knows what Prussian Blue is? It's the name of the gas that they use at the death camps to exterminate Jews. But in the case of what we were dealing with in Northwest Montana, Prussian Blue was the name of a pop group of Lynx and Lamb Gady, the daughters to April Gady. And they sang Christina Aguilera, Britney Spears style pop songs. But the lyrics were all neo-Nazi white supremacist lyrics. You can see, if you really pay attention to Lynx and Lamb, you can see the little emoji of Hitler on their t-shirt. Now that's a picture, below them, that's a picture of them when they were in their 20s. The top one is when they were still in Prussian Blue. I will say that Lynx and Lamb have liberated themselves from their mother's control, and they've denounced everything they did as children, saying that we didn't know what we were doing, we were just following the instructions of our mother. According to the Southern Poverty Law Center, to this day, April Gady is the #8 neo-Nazi white supremacist, dangerous person in the United States. And she and her cohort dropped these eggs on our front lawn to recruit children and to let us know that they were, again, watching us. I will say about April, I actually did end up having a very interesting interaction with April. Her neighbor came to me one day and said, I need you to know that April isn't everything that you think that she is, and that she really is a caring and doting mother. And I think there's an opportunity for you to have a relationship with her and to build a track of communication with her. And she said, I can make that happen if you would like that to happen. And I said, yeah, let's do that. And so we created a back channel communication, April and I, and we communicated with each other on a regular basis until I left Montana. That picture that I showed you of me with the microphone or the megaphone organizing the crowd, there's another picture of me guiding the crowd that day, and I'm doing this. And April emailed me saying that she had seen that picture, and she said, I knew deep down inside that you were one of us. And honestly, it made me laugh so hard because I have such a dark, sick sense of humor that I was like, I'm going to email her back. And I emailed her back and told her that I laughed, that I thought her joke was funny, and that I'd like to, start to have a communication with her. And we talked back and forth. And probably one of the most important things that ever happened was Lamb had her tonsils out. And I found out about that through this communication with April. And so I went to the grocery store, and I got a bucket of ice cream, and I drove it over to April's house with a get well card for Lamb. and I gave it to her. And when she found that bucket, I could not knock on the door, trust me, I could not knock on the door. But I left it there for her. And when she received it and she saw the card, it opened up the communication and built up the relationship so much more than what we had before. And she's a very complicated human being. And she is incredibly broken and damaged from an upbringing that was violent, from a marriage that was abusive. She found meaning in white supremacy in a way that I don't know why, but she found meaning in it. But I've come to know that hurt people, and she is one really hurt human being. But I did see, besides the stuff that she did with Lamb and Wings, I did see that she had a great deal of care and love for her daughters. And so she stopped being a monster and started becoming a human. And I really want you to know that was a real spiritual discipline for me during this time. That I could not look at these people as anything other than children of God that were broken and really hurting other people. But I wanted to make sure that I remained very much on the side of love. And that was a real spiritual discipline. That took lots of prayer, trust me. It took lots and lots of prayer. Because the violence escalated more. On October 2nd, 2011, I came into my church. That's a Sunday morning. I came into my church. How are we doing on time? Oh, we're almost there. I came into my church, and the windows had been shot out. The chandeliers in the sanctuary had been destroyed due to bullets fired into the church. There were 7 bullet holes in the back of the sanctuary. And I got in there about 7:45 in the morning. Immediately called the police and called the moderator of the church and said, we can't hold worship in the sanctuary. I want you to organize people who come to church on Sunday morning and take them to the park down the road and do outside worship. And that's what she did while I stood there and worked with the police. Due to storm front, and again, people not necessarily being so smart in what they put online, we found out that Craig Cobb was the guy who took responsibility for shooting up the church as an act of intimidation of me. I mean, they did come on Saturday night. They could have come on Sunday morning. I mean, yeah. They came on Saturday night on purpose. It was a moment of intimidation. They weren't trying to kill us. They were just trying to intimidate us to get us to stop. Craig Cobb is a former Marine and someone who has a severe amount of PTSD from his time in Vietnam. And after serving in the Marine Corps in Vietnam, he came back incredibly broken, and again found meaning in white supremacy and neo-Nazism. And again, I raise that for you, just to continually keep in your mind and your heart that these are hurt people hurting people. If you want to know more about Craig, of course you can look him up online and look at his Wikipedia page, but there actually is a documentary about him because eventually he was chased out of Kalispell due to the work that we did. And he went to North Dakota, to Leith, North Dakota. And there is a documentary called Welcome to Leith, Leith, and it catalogs the work that Craig did in North Dakota, mirroring the work that he did in Northwest Montana to build a neo-Nazi white supremacist community there. It's at that time that I realized that I shouldn't be at my church by myself. It was a very small church. It was a new church start in the mid-90s. It grew to about 80 people, and then the minister, some of you have heard this story before, the minister and the organist got into a fight. Yeah, that's right. I thought someone might know that story. And that blew up the church, and it broke in half. And half the people left, and it was down to 40 people. And then that minister left, and that organist left, and then a new minister came, and a new piano player came. And they coexisted for about 3 years. And tell me if you've heard this story before. The minister and the piano player got into a fight. And that broke the church in half again. So it was at that moment that I got a call from the Montana conference as I was chaplain at Heidelberg College in Tiffin, Ohio, saying, "Hey, we've got this church that really needs to be revitalized. Would you like to come to be the minister there?" Which is how I got to Montana. I never thought I was going to do this. I thought I was just going to build up a church. But because it was a small church, I didn't have any other staff at all. I was the only staff person, and the per diem organist / piano player who played on Sunday morning, who we got along with perfectly. Beautiful man. He actually is now retired in Maryland. Somehow looked me up and found that I was at Serving Park Church now, and actually sent me a card about 8 months ago, congratulating me on my newest call. So this beautiful man, Bruce is his name. Such a beautiful man. But I realized at that point, after Craig Cobb shot up the church, that I probably shouldn't go to church by myself. So I decided to start bringing my dog. And yes, Scott asked her, is this one of the dogs that did nothing when the young man broke into your house on Sunday? And I was like, yes it is. It is one. I started bringing Baloo. This is Baloo when she was 13. She only lived about 6 months after taking this picture. But in 2011, she was a vibrant 6-year-old German Shepherd. She was about 90 pounds. And yes, when the young man came into my house on Sunday, she recognized immediately that he wasn't a threat. But on one day, I truly believe that she saved my life. Because the church that I served in Kalispell sat between 2 homeless shelters. And so we would often get people coming in asking for assistance, and that was a very powerful part of our ministry. So we always had the front door open. And most of the time when Baloo was there with me, if one of the people came in asking for assistance, she ran up to them, leaned into them, tail wagging. They petted her. I got them the help that I could give, and they went on their way. But one day, we hear the front door open of the church, and Baloo and I are in my office, and she bolts to the front of the church. And before I can get there, she starts to growl and to bark. And I walk up, and this gentleman is standing in front of me. And I say, "Baloo, come here, sit." And she won't come to me, which was not like Baloo at all. And I snap, "Baloo, come here." And she won't. She stands in between me and him, growling, her teeth bared. She will not calm down, and she's barking loudly at him. And he's trying to tell me something, but I can't hear him because Baloo is barking so loud, and she will not stop. He gets so frustrated that he cannot talk with me and get anywhere near me that he turns around and walks out. 72 hours later, he's arrested for aggravated assault of attacking a Native American who was living in Kalispell working as a social worker. And he has been in prison, in and out of prison, a number of times. He's an ex-Marine. He served in Iraq. He suffers from PTSD, and he found meaning and purpose in white supremacy, neo-Nazi ideology. I hold this up to you again, that hurt people hurt people. And so Baloo, I really do believe, at least prevented me from getting my butt kicked, if not saving my life. It's at this point, my friends, and just a little bit more, and then we'll call it a day, that we felt like we had to get out in front of it. And so working with the Southern Poverty Law Center, we created an auxiliary organization in Kalispell that we dubbed and made into an LLC called Love Lives Here. It was an organization that used education, demonstrations, and powerful social justice outreach to create a mechanism to be able to respond and to get out in front of the neo-Nazi activity in Northwest Montana. One of the very first things that we did was invite Naomi Ban, who was from Hungary, and she was a Holocaust survivor. And we got her into 5 high schools, the 2 high schools in Kalispell, the high school in Columbia Falls, the high school in Whitefish, and the high school in Big Fork. And she was there for an entire week. And every night of that week, she did another program talking about her story of surviving the Holocaust. We lost Naomi in 2019, and when Naomi died, her daughter sent me an email letting me know that Naomi had died. I'd kept in touch with her for a number of years after that experience. She is one of the most beautiful, brave, courageous souls I ever met. And many of our high school students, it was all at the high schools, had never met a Holocaust survivor before, but many of them had talked about how impactful that story of hearing the life of a Holocaust survivor was. And unfortunately, Naomi is like many of our Holocaust survivors. They're all, their generation is coming to pass. And so we just say thank you to them for their bravery and their witness. Again, I hope you recognize that so many of the people being recruited into white supremacy and neo-Nazis have had prior military service, and their military service left them wounded in many, many ways. And in some cases, even left them homeless. And so one of the things that we started doing was working to help homeless veterans in Kalispell in northwest Montana. We raised a lot of money and provided, like I said, there are the 2 homeless shelters right there by my church. Many of those folks that were in there were homeless veterans. We started a really profound ministry to them, and it meant a lot to me to be able to work with them. And then lastly, we created, at the very beginning of this presentation, I showed you this park that we had redesigned to be a community spirit monument. Children, families, folks of all ages, backgrounds, races, religions came down to Woodland Park to redesign this pavilion. And if I could go way up close, it's made up of tiles, and each one of the tiles has hearts and rainbows and stars and quotes from Martin Luther King and other inspirational leaders. It's really a place of love and inclusion. And so when they defiled it with the swastikas, the community came out in droves to clean up the place and to make sure that it remained a place of a monument to the spirit of that community. My faith was really important to me during this time. There were a lot of people who were not people of faith who were involved in the work that we did through Love Lives Here and all the different actions and demonstrations that we did. But for me, I was really driven by my faith. And one of the major things was that my faith helped me was to constantly be reminded that I'm not alone in this work. That God was with me in this, and that at the times that I was afraid, and I was afraid many times. I'm not a coward, but I'm also not immune to anxiety and paranoia. Nothing makes you more paranoid than being asked by the Southern Poverty Law Center to track neo-Nazi activity. Trust me, you will look around, you will look over your shoulder a lot. Then when you walk in and your church has been shot up, you think, oh my gosh, can I be here the next time that happens? So I'm not a coward, but I'm also not immune. And so knowing that God was with me through that was very important. And the John scripture verse became one of my favorites. And one that I used as a mantra very often. But praying for my enemies and loving my enemies, like I said, I tried to build relationships with April. I was not interested in having a relationship with Craig Cobb or Carl Gartz. I really wasn't. I like hanging around with good people. There was something good in April. I could feel something good in April, and I wanted to be part of a relationship that could draw that out. I was hoping I could draw that out. When my church was shot up, April did reach out to me, and she said, I just want you to know that I didn't do that. I said, okay, you didn't stop it either, but she did want me to know that it wasn't her, that our relationship in some way, shape, or form meant something to her. But the last but certainly not least is this idea of forgiveness. Now, they did criminal activity. They were violent, they attacked people, they vandalized. There's a difference between being guilty in the court of law and me being able to find forgiveness for them in my heart. I want you to know very much that I recognize the difference between those two things. You can have forgiveness and justice, and people deserve justice, particularly those who have been attacked and violently abused. But that last one about always keeping forgiveness at the front of my heart, I think really helped me not turn into a monster myself, And I never demonized them, and I tried to this day never to demonize them, as much as I cannot condone the ideology and behavior. Then last but certainly not least, I know I'm at my hour, is I want to end with a positive story, which is Scott Ernst he grew up in Florida, and he also came from a very troubled home, an abusive home. He was ostracized and bullied in high school, and he was looking for meaning, and he was finding it in online communities, and he stumbled one day onto Stormfront, where he became friends with many neo-Nazis through that online community. It was there that he learned of April Gaddy and of April's two daughters, and he started following them online and downloading their music. And you could find them on YouTube and other platforms at the time. And in the comments, he would read their comments, and some of the comments were absolutely vile. Those are two precious young girls, particularly at that time. And some of the comments that were left, particularly by men, regardless of their political affiliations, were absolutely ridiculously vile. And the comments that they made and the threats that they made to those two little girls really turned Scott even more so into the ideology, because he thought that everyone who resisted white supremacy and neo-Nazism were these trolls who were threatening to do sexual violence to these two young girls. And so he moved up to Montana. He became friends with April and with the girls, and he started, because he had such a gift for social media and online activity, he started doing the Pioneer Little Europe website and a lot of their social media activity. And I started having a conversation with Scott on Stormfront as White Rabbit 1975, and we built up a friendship, and we emailed each other back and forth, and we really, even my relationship with April was nothing compared to what my relationship with Scott was. Scott became very disillusioned with the Carl Garsts, the Craig Cobbs, and the Burkharts of the world. The violence that he saw them perpetrating really went against what he thought the movement was about. He said, no, it's the people who are against us that are the violent ones. We're not supposed to be the violent ones. And so when he saw the violence happening, he couldn't maintain it anymore, and he broke free. And he moved back down to Tampa, where he became friends with a minister who led him through a real kind of faith conversion of love, God's love, of love for him, the love for your neighbor. And Scott now has completely removed himself from the neo-Nazi white supremacist movement, and he now travels the country giving motivational talks, sharing his story about once being indoctrinated with white supremacist ideologies, and that how one can actually remove oneself from that and be liberated from it. And so Scott, in this day, lives down in Florida, and he's doing the good work. So I wanted you to kind of end with this kind of good story about not all is lost, and that many of our neighbors, many of our kindred who are caught in the trap of this ideology, that there is hope for them, and I want you to continue to pray for them as much as you possibly can. So that's my hour. I know you might have some questions or comments, but I also want to honor the hour. So if you want to stick around for a little bit and ask me some questions, you can, but those of you who need to leave, I totally understand. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. As you can tell, this is not some slick presentation. This is just me telling my story and stuff. So, yeah, Carrie.
What was the remark you said, people who are hurt?
People who are hurt people. Another way of saying it, you know Richard Rohr, some of you are Richard Rohr's fan. Richard Rohr says that pain not transformed is transmitted. And so that's a big part of our spiritual journey is transforming our pain so that we don't end up hurting other people. It's amazing how much of The neo-Nazi movement has been fueled by children who have been abandoned by their families, soldiers, Marines who have fought in wars and have come back with PTSD and moral injury, with people who have broken marriages, those who have grown up in abusive religious systems. The community is fraught with those folks. So part of the work to overcome white supremacy and neo-Nazism with Christian nationalism is to continue to do this healing work in our community and with people that are in our lives. Because again, I maintain to this day, Carrie, that the vast majority of them are hurt people who are hurting people. And they're not monsters, but they are living out an ideology that can do incredible harm to people, particularly our black kindred, our queer neighbors, our Jewish and Muslim friends. These are the folks who they target. And then people like me, who has the audacity to stand up and say, you shouldn't, there's another way. And there's like, there's no other way. And they'll make sure. And they're not afraid to use violence, that's for sure. I will say, moving to San Diego, it took me a good 2 or 3 years after being in San Diego to kind of finally realize, like, they're not coming after me. There's a piece of me that was like, when Terry's like, we should put this online. I'm like, should we? Because they've left me alone since 2012. So, but that's all right, it's okay. And I haven't had a conversation with Scott or Applegate in a really long time. Any other questions?
How big was your town, Kalispell?
So Kalispell is the 5th largest town in Montana at 50,000 people.
Yeah, because you were talking about there were a number of churches.
Yeah. So 50,000 people in Kalispell, and then another 20,000 up in Whitefish, and 15 over in Columbia Falls. So in the county, there was a little over 100,000 people in the county. So there was one Methodist church, one Presbyterian church, and they were all good people.
Obviously, the library, whoever was in charge of the library had some, wanted to help those people.
Oh, no, okay, no, let me say this. Thank you for bringing up the library. The librarians are dope. I love librarians. And you know what librarians are? Advocates for free speech. And this is what you needed to do to rent a room in the library. You needed to be a citizen of the county, and you needed to pay your $25 deposit. And Carl Garst was a citizen of the county, and he paid his $25. And so the librarian said, we're not going to censor the activity in the library. And I so appreciated them to the point, Marcia, that when the leadership group of Love Lives Here talked about targeting the library and trying to get them to prohibit the neo-Nazi groups from using the library, I threatened to resign as the executive director of Love Lives Here. I said, we are not targeting, if you target the library, I walk. Because those librarians are champions and they are amazing. So no, they were not, no, they were on the side of Love Lives Here, but they also were very adamant that we believe in free speech and we will not be the censors. But they hated it. They hated that they were coming into the library, this place where like children were supposed to like learn and stuff. They hated it, but they weren't going to stand in the way because the neo-Nazi groups were following the rules. But thank you for saying that. I really am so glad I got a chance to say that. No, librarians, any librarians here, thank you. Thank you. Y'all are amazing. Don't even get me started on the book banning over in Ottawa County. So, any other questions or comments? All right. I know y'all have been here for a while. Thank y'all so very much for coming. I really